Hello and welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Lizzie and a very warm welcome to you all. Today I'm doing my October wrap up. October was a pretty good month for reading. I think I've got about 12 books, which is a good number. I think any more than that and it's too many, so that's a good number. And I mean, there were some duds, but some new favourites this month. There were some fantastic books. So yeah, without any further ado, let's get to what I read in October. October feels like it's whizzed by, but it feels like a very long time since I read this first book, and that is Something Fabulous by Alexis Hall. I have a advanced copy, which I still am baffled by my ownership of this, but I do, and I loved this so much. It was so good. This is a Regency romance, but queer. Basically everyone in this book was queer. There was like one straight character who briefly appeared at the end, stole the one scene she had, and it was fantastic. It was glorious. Alexis Hall is the author of Boyfriend Material, so as soon as I found out he had a Regency romance coming out, I was like, yes, yes, give it to me. And it was just glorious, pure joy from start to finish. This story follows Valentine, the Duke of Malvern, who his whole life he's had a bit of an understanding that there's the daughter of a duke or something that he's going to propose to. And he proposes to her and she does not take it well. She has always wanted to have a storybook romance and this is not what she had in mind. So she runs away and Valentine enlists her twin brother, who is equally romantic and idealistically minded, to go and find his sort of betrothed. Shenanigans ensue. Valentine realises that he might not be as straight as he had previously assumed, and he definitely is not as straight as he had previously assumed, as he is sort of introduced to this whole world of LGBTQ plus people all living their best lives. It was so funny, like proper laugh out loud, hilariously funny moments. Every single Regency romance trope is in there and is subverted in one way or another, sometimes in a really sort of clever, witty way, sometimes in just a hilarious way. I had such a good time. And so often, historical stories that have queer people are really sad. And this wasn't, and I did like that. It was just so much fun. Yes, it was everything I could ever have wanted. The next book I read is another review copy that I got off NetGalley, and that is Cunning Women by Elizabeth Lee. And this is one I've been seeing around for a few months and I always saw it and thought that looks like it's up my alley, and it was. Cunning Women is a historical novel about a girl in her mid to late teens who is the daughter of the town's cunning woman, i.e. herbalist, who might be accused of being a witch. And it followed her story as she looks for a better life for herself and for her family and falls in love with the son of an influential farmer, and their kind of love story of the sort of outsider of the village and someone who's very influential, and the impact that has on village life and the village community. I really enjoyed this. It was very atmospheric and a perfect autumnal historical read. I also really like, this is one of my favourite kind of, is it a trope? I don't know, that in historical fiction that is about women accused of witchcraft, or just people accused of witchcraft, that there is a level of ambiguity as to whether they can actually do magic. And I liked that. Overall, I gave that one 4 stars. Next up, it was another review copy, this one sent to me by the author, and that is Wildflowers by Hayden Winston. And this follows a young man called Ansel who comes back to his hometown for his grandfather's funeral and is forced to confront a lot of the ghosts from his childhood and from his youth while he is there. For some reason I thought this would be a light-hearted fun book. It very much was not. It was good, but it was not light-hearted or fun. I don't know why I thought it was. I think I saw contemporary and was like, oh, that'll be fun, but it was not. This was definitely a book of 2 parts, 3 parts. If you chopped off the first chapter and the last chapter, I would have loved it from start to finish. I thought the central chapters of the book were really, really good, really well written, very emotional with lots of really interesting themes and all sort of explored very subtly. The first chapter was a lot of exposition. It was a lot. And the last chapter didn't seem to bear any relation to the rest of the story. It just kind of came out of nowhere and completely threw me off. So I think I gave this one 3 stars in the end because so much of it was so good, but it was let down by that first and last chapter for me. Then I finished listening to the audiobook of The Sign of 4 by Arthur Conan Doyle. And this is the second Sherlock Holmes book. In this book, they're kind of in both, but I only read The Sign of the 4 this month. And I loved this. It was so good. I feel like the characters of Holmes and Watson are really well established by the time you get to this second book. It was just a great time from start to finish. As with A Study in Scarlet, it did drag towards the end when you're going into like the backstory of why they did what they did. But I felt like that was much better balanced in this one. And I think from here on out, I've got quite a lot of short stories before we get to another novel. So I might dip in and out a bit and read a few short stories whenever I fancy until I hit another novel. So yeah, really enjoying reading these, which is good because I'm committed to the username now. The next book I read was Woven in Moonlight by Isabel Ibanez. This is a YA fantasy inspired by Bolivian folklore. The main character, Jimena, she is a stand-in condesa. Think the Padme Amidala situation of like the real one is pretending to be like a servant and the substitute is pretending to be the real one. That's the kind of situation that they've got going. Her people have been at war for many, many years, and in order to create peace, then the Condessa, or her in the Condessa's place, goes to marry the prince from the opposite side. And she has powers where she can take moonlight and weave it, as you can guess from the title, weave it into tapestries and create animals out of it. I loved this book. From the very start, you were just absorbed straight into the story. You couldn't help but just be stuck straight into it. I think I read it in one sitting. It was just such a readable story. The plot was really interesting and subverted a lot of typical fantasy plots and explored lots of interesting ideas about things like colonialism and things such as that. I will say that there are reviews from other people who are of Bolivian heritage. So the author is a Bolivian American, I believe, and there are some other reviews that say that this is not a good depiction of Bolivian politics or history, and that they feel that it has very much twisted a lot of things or promoted ideas that they don't think should be promoted. So I think it's worth bearing in mind with this book that some of their own voices reviews aren't massively positive about it. So I think that's just something bearing in mind, especially when they've literally put on the book that it's inspired by Bolivian politics and history. That some people are disagreeing with that is worth bearing in mind. But I did enjoy it very much as a book, and I think the ideas in it are still very interesting and something that we don't usually see in fantasy. So yes, something to bear in mind while you're reading it, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. Then I read my book club's pick for this month, and that is The Chosen and the Beautiful by Nivor. This is a fantastical reimagining of The Great Gatsby. I knew that it was Gatsby related. I knew that it was queer and fantasy going in. That was all I knew, and it was not what I expected. I do need to reread The Great Gatsby. That's what this book made me realise. Because I didn't even realise, I'd fully forgotten that Jordan Baker existed in The Great Gatsby. And she's the main perspective in this novel. I just hadn't put 2 and 2 together. So it's Great Gatsby from Jordan Baker's perspective in a fantasy 1920s New York. And Jordan Baker is also of Vietnamese heritage, and that kind of influences the way that she interacts with her friends and the people around her who see her as a sort of exotic accessory rather than as a person in her own right. She is also queer. Nick is also queer, although that's not that different from The Great Gatsby. And Gatsby definitely isn't straight in this either. So it was, you know, a big sort of reimagining of the story. I think it worked so well as that reimagining. It was such a clever way of doing it. And I really appreciated all these different approaches and things that were sort of dropped in there as well. And also just as a kind of outsider view, as in writing from our modern perspective on things like flapper culture and things such as that, was really, really interesting. And I loved lots of the little magical touches that just made this world just a little bit more mysterious, which was just really, really cool. The only thing that let it down a bit for me was that some of the magic didn't feel very developed. It was quite hard to kind of work out what the magic system was or where it was coming from, and there was a sort of big reveal at the end that I wasn't a huge fan of. But I did really enjoy this book and I gave it 4 stars. Next. I finally read it. Moby Dick by Herman Melville. And can I say that reading this book was my white whale? I feel like I can, because I've read this book. Even if I'm using that incorrectly, I've earned that right. I mean, it's just so long. It's so long. It's 600 pages, and so much of it is just facts about whales. And I just... There were some bits of this book that I really enjoyed. I enjoyed the first 100 pages. They were absolutely wild. Some fantastic quotes, whether in or out of context. I enjoyed the last few chapters. I feel really bad for the whale, you know, because like he didn't know. He didn't have anything against Captain Ahab. He's just caught up in this mess. Now they won't leave him alone. Hot takes with Lizzie, I guess. But I did read this for the Back to the Classics challenge, for a book about an animal, no matter how metaphorical the animal is. It even says that on the prompt. It's all good. For anyone about to tell me that it's not really about the whale. Let me tell you, there's a lot about whales in here. I read it. I've done it. 2 stars. Never have to read it again. To the charity shop with you. The next book I read was another review copy, and that is Things a Bright Girl Can Do by Sally Nichols. I mean, it's historical fiction. It's about suffragettes. There's a sapphic romance. All things that I love. It was great. I had a great time. This is a YA historical fiction about 3 girls who join the suffragette or the suffragist movement. And I mean, it was great. It was really great. I feel like this is quite a universal thing for adults reading YA novels, is I just want to sit the characters down and be like, let's just talk it out. Let's talk it out. You can chill out. Let me pass on some information that I have, things that I've learned since I was your age. Those 5 years ago. Because, oh boy, you know. And there were definitely a lot of moments towards the start where I was like, oh no, just please don't, please just make better choices, and what I loved in this book is that by the end they had all grown so much that they were making better choices. That was just glorious. I loved it. We love to see growth. Love it. And I think what was so good about it, because at the very start, so there's 3 main characters and they're all so principled and driven, and they know what they need to fix in the world and they're going to do whatever they can to fix it. And sometimes they butt heads as to what is the most important cause or how to fix things, which I think is very true for a lot of young people, that it's, you know, there's a lot of things in the world that need fixing and it is overwhelming, and we don't know how to fix them, and we do our best, and sometimes we clash with people who are on the same side as us. But by the end, they all had a better understanding of each other and each other's perspectives, and a better understanding of the nuances of all of those discussions and arguments they'd been having before, without having to compromise that principled part of their character they had from the very start. They never went back on their beliefs. They never had to compromise their beliefs. Sometimes they were put in a position where they thought about it, and that made them realise how difficult some of these things are. And I just really appreciated that. I thought that was such a good thing to see in a book. It's so rare that we see quite so much character development in one book that's done so well. I absolutely loved this book. 5 stars. Then I read Things We Lost in the Fire by Mariana Enriquez, and I read this for the Book Voyage Challenge for South America. This is a short story collection set in Buenos Aires and follows different women throughout the last few decades in Argentina. And oh boy, it was amazing. This book is incredible. The stories are just... It was just beautifully written. It was haunting, very haunting. And I think what set this apart from a lot of other short story collections is I would open it and read one story and be unable to put it down for the duration of that story. And I would get to the end of that story and I would be like, I need a break. I need to pause, because there's a lot of gothic and horror themes throughout this one. Things are not always as they seem. Some of them are more gory than others. Yeah, definitely not for the faint of heart, this one. There was some really like, oh no kind of scenes in this one. But, you know, amazingly written. So many interesting characters and themes and ideas. It's the sort of book that makes me wish I was better at literary criticism, so that I could actually properly analyse it and know more things about it, rather than just be like, this was good. But it was good. I gave it 5 stars. You should definitely check it out if you are interested in reading it, but maybe want to read during the daytime. And then another review copy, another historical fiction centering the stories of women that have been lost to the never-ending something of time. 3 by Jennifer Jenkins. This is set in Eam, the Plague Village, which was a village that was completely ravaged by plague in the 17th century. And they cut themselves off from the world. No one came in or out of the village. They would exchange sort of food parcels and things like on the wall, basically, kind of probably social distancing, you know, like when you leave your shopping for your neighbour at the end of the pathway. That's what they were doing, but on a whole village scale. And this story centres the story of 3 women who all lived in the village. I kind of don't want to say too much about this one, because when I went to put my review on Goodreads and I was looking through some of the other reviews, I spotted that the author had said that the NetGalley version, she'd accidentally uploaded a really old version and had gone through a lot of editing before the final product. And most of my complaints with the book, I think, would have been picked up in an edit, if that makes sense. Not so much copy edit things, but things like how, because it was very historically accurate, lots of people had the same name, which made it really hard to follow, or we didn't get a huge amount of emotional depth for some of the characters, which just kind of, it felt a bit like you were reading, it was like a docudrama in a book, you know? So you have the fictionalised version, but it's just there to be like, this is what happened based on facts we know. So it was, if you are interested in the Plague Village and don't know anything about it, then I think it would be a really good book. I went in knowing quite a lot about it, so I think that sort of almost let it down a bit for me, because the main takeaway from the book was to tell the story to people who didn't know it. I felt like that was the goal of the book, and I did know it, unfortunately. But yes, it's another historical fiction to check out if you are interested. The next book I read was Heartstopper Volume 1 by Alice Oseman, When I say I read volume 1, what I mean is I read volume 1 and then I immediately went online and read the entire rest of Heartstopper in one night. From the get-go, I was invested. This is a YA contemporary graphic novel that follows two teenage boys, Nick and Charlie, as they become friends at school and realise that they have feelings for each other. It explores romance and love and coming out and mental health and all sorts of other things such as that. I mean, it was so great. I did give this 4 stars just because this first volume on its own just didn't feel like enough. And not just in a kind of, I want more way, in that I got to the end and I was like, not much has actually happened. Partly because it is a graphic novel and because like the art is beautiful, but there's not a huge amount happening on each page, that actually you get to the end and it feels like you've read chapter 1. And I think that it literally is, that's why it's volume 1, you know. But I did get to the end and felt a bit like, oh, is that it for volume 1? And then I realised, I hadn't realised before that it was all online. So then I went and read the rest and just loved it. It was really great. So definitely go and check out Heartstopper if you are interested. Then I listened to the audiobook of A Marvellous Light by Freya Marske, and this book was so good. It was so good. It was so good. If I could have a sequel, I know it's not even out yet, but if I could have a sequel now, that would be glorious. This was a NetGalley audiobook arc, which I've never had before, and honestly, the app was really good. Just like a little shout out to the NetGalley app for their audiobook. Honestly, I preferred using it to using things like Audible and stuff. It was a really great app to use. That aside, this is a historical fantasy set in Edwardian England, with a queer romance. Everything I love. I knew I would love it, and I was right. It was just so good. The main character, Robin Blythe, is a newly minted baronet. He's just inherited the title and he has no money. He's inherited basically nothing. So he takes up a job in the civil service, and due to an administrative error, he has become basically the liaison between the magical community and the Prime Minister. But he did not know that magic even existed until he set foot in this office for the first time. So already, we love it. Then in comes grumpy librarian Edwin, who is his sort of magical counterpart, who is just so annoyed by all of this. Can't believe it. It's just, I mean, he's always in a grump. That's why we love him. That's why he's relatable. And they're like, oh, it's okay. We'll sort it out. We'll speak to someone, get it all sorted. You can go back to like a normal, non-magical job. And then, so Robin's predecessor disappeared in mysterious circumstances, and the people behind his disappearance start going after Robin and cast a curse on him. So then Edwin has to help him lift the curse, and shenanigans ensue, and everything was amazing, and I loved it. It was, I think every single box got 10 out of 10 on core pile for this one for me. This was just, it was glorious. I am going to do a whole video review on this. I've already written my review, but I'm going to do a whole video on it because I loved it so much. It was amazing. It was truly, truly amazing. The last book I read this month is Gentleman Jack by Anne Chomer, and this is the tie-in to the BBC series. I believe Anne Chomer was one of the main historians on the series, so this is kind of a culmination of her research for the show. And so Gentleman Jack, the TV show and this book, are about a real person, Anne Lister, who was a landowner and businesswoman and out and proud lesbian in early 19th century, I think. In this book kind of follows her in the 1830s. So yeah, the kind of first half of the 19th century. And I did enjoy this book. She was a very prolific diary writer, so I think most of the biographies of her, unlike most biographies which are trying to research as much as possible and kind of fill out as many gaps as they can, it's almost the opposite with Anna Lister, of taking just a sheer amount of information about her life and condensing it into a readable format. And this was very readable. I can definitely say that. I think because it's a TV tie-in rather than a biography of Anna Lister, I mean, it was just about the bit of her life that was covered in the TV show. There was a kind of one chapter of her background and one chapter as to what happens next, basically. But it did feel a little bit like a kind of rehashing of the TV show, with basically just kind of, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. It would have been nice to have a bit more depth to it, but there were some, I think, previously unpublished parts of her diary in here, which kind of really fleshed it out as well. So I gave this one 3 stars. Thank you very much for joining me on my October wrap-up. Let me know what you have been reading in October, and also if you have read any of the books that I've talked about today, what did you think of them? I'll leave links for all of the books I've talked about today, as well as any written reviews, in the description, and you can also find all my other social medias down there as well. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!